The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the palace bedroom, casting golden streaks across the polished wooden floor. Catherine sat at her vanity, brushing her long brown hair with slow, deliberate strokes. In the mirror, she could see William still sleeping peacefully, his face relaxed and free from the worry lines that had appeared more frequently in recent months. She set down the brush and touched her throat gently. The persistent cough that had plagued her for weeks seemed to have quieted for now, but the memory of yesterday's doctor visit lingered like a dark cloud over her thoughts. Dr. Matthews had been kind, but direct when he delivered the news that would change everything. "Your Royal Highness," he had said, his voice gentle but firm, "the tests have confirmed our concerns. It's stage 4 lung cancer, and it has already spread significantly." Catherine had sat in stunned silence, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she always did when receiving difficult news. Years of royal training had taught her to maintain composure even when her world was crumbling around her. But, inside, her heart had shattered into 1,000 pieces. The doctor continued explaining treatment options, timelines, and medical procedures, but his words seemed to come from very far away. All Catherine could think about was William, and how she would tell the man she loved that their time together was running out. Now, sitting in their bedroom as morning light danced across the walls they had shared for so many years, Catherine felt the weight of the secret pressing down on her chest. How do you tell your husband that the woman he married, the mother of his children, the partner he had planned to grow old with, might not see another Christmas? William stirred behind her, and she quickly wiped away the tears that had begun to fall. She watched in the mirror as he opened his eyes and smiled that warm, sleepy smile that had made her fall in love with him all those years ago at university. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, his voice thick with sleep. He sat up and reached for her, pulling her back into bed beside him. "You're up early. Everything all right?" Catherine nestled into his arms, breathing in his familiar scent of cedar and mint. For a moment, she allowed herself to pretend that everything was normal, that this was just another ordinary morning in their extraordinary life together. "Just couldn't sleep," she said softly, tracing circles on his chest with her finger. "I was thinking about our weekend plans. Maybe we could take the children to that little cottage in the Cotswolds, the one with the garden that George loves so much." William tightened his arms around her. "That sounds perfect. We could pick apples and have a proper picnic. Louis would love the fresh air, and Charlotte could bring her art supplies to paint the countryside." The mention of their children sent another wave of pain through Catherine's heart. How would she explain to 8-year-old George that Mummy was sick? How could she help 5-year-old Charlotte understand why she might not be there for future tea parties and bedtime stories? And little Louis, barely 4 years old, how could she make sure he would remember her love, even if her time with him was cut short? "William," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you." But before she could continue, William's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his private secretary. The king needed to see them both immediately for an important matter concerning the royal schedule for the coming months. "We should get ready," William said, kissing the top of her head. "Father probably wants to discuss the upcoming tour of Australia. You know how he worries about the travel arrangements." Catherine nodded, grateful for the interruption, but knowing it was only delaying the inevitable. As William headed to the shower, she stood again at the window, looking out at the gardens where their children played, where they had hosted countless gatherings, where they had built a life filled with duty, purpose, and love. The irony wasn't lost on her. She, who had spent years supporting cancer charities, visiting hospitals, and comforting families facing similar diagnoses, was now on the other side of that equation. She understood now why the patients she had met often spoke about the difficulty of telling their loved ones. It wasn't just about facing your own mortality. It was about watching the people you love begin to grieve while you were still alive. Later that morning, as they walked through the palace corridors toward the king's study, Catherine felt each step as if she were walking toward an execution. Not her own, but the execution of the life they had built together, the future they had planned, the dreams they had shared. William walked beside her, straightening his tie and discussing the day's schedule with the easy confidence of a man who believed his wife would be by his side for decades to come. His trust in their future together made Catherine's secret feel even heavier. The king's study was filled with the scent of leather-bound books and Earl Grey tea. Charles looked up from his desk as they entered, his face serious but warm. "Ah, William, Catherine, thank you for coming so quickly. I wanted to discuss the schedule for next year's events. We have some significant anniversaries approaching, and I thought we might plan something special. As the king outlined his plans for celebrations and ceremonies that stretched well into the following year, Catherine found herself unable to focus on his words. Instead, she watched William's face light up as he discussed ideas for community outreach programs and charitable initiatives. His enthusiasm for their shared work, for building something meaningful together, made her heart ache with a pain that went beyond any physical symptom. Catherine, the king's voice broke through her thoughts. What do you think about hosting the summer garden party for the Children's Hospital charity? It was your idea originally, and I think it would be wonderful to make it an annual tradition. She looked up to find both men watching her expectantly. The garden party. She had proposed it months ago, envisioning years of bringing joy to sick children and their families. Now, the possibility that she might not be there to see even the first one felt like a cruel joke. Yes, she managed to say, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. I think that would be lovely. A tradition that could continue for years to come. The meeting continued for another hour, filled with discussions of duty rosters, charitable commitments, and family obligations. With each plan made for the future, Catherine felt herself slipping further away from the life she had always known. As they left the king's study, William took her hand in his. You seemed a bit distant in there. Are you feeling all right? You've been looking tired lately. Catherine squeezed his hand, memorizing the feeling of his fingers interlaced with hers. I'm fine. Just thinking about everything we discussed. It's a lot to take in. But, as they walked back to their private quarters, Catherine knew that her time for avoiding the truth was running out. The symptoms were getting worse, and soon even her careful efforts to hide them wouldn't be enough. William deserved to know. Their children deserved to understand. And she needed to begin the process of saying goodbye to the life she had loved so deeply. That evening, after dinner with the children, after bedtime stories and goodnight kisses, after all the beautiful, ordinary moments that made up their daily life, Catherine finally found the courage she had been searching for all day. William, she said as they sat together on the sofa in their private sitting room, her hand resting on his arm. I need to tell you about my appointment with Dr. Matthews yesterday. The change in her tone made William look up from the documents he had been reviewing. His blue eyes met hers, and she saw the exact moment when he realized that whatever she was about to say would change everything. What is it? He asked, setting aside his papers and giving her his complete attention. Catherine took a deep breath, knowing that once she spoke the words aloud, there would be no going back to the innocence of this morning, no return to the simple happiness of not knowing what lay ahead. The test came back, she began, her voice steady but soft. William, I'm sick. Very sick. And, with those words, the life they had known together began to slip away, replaced by something neither of them had ever imagined they would have to face. The color drained from William's face as Catherine's words hung in the air between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The grandfather clock in the corner continued its steady tick-tick-tick, marking the seconds as their world shifted on its axis. Sick, William repeated, his voice barely audible. What do you mean, sick? Catherine reached for his hands, holding them tightly in her own. She could feel them trembling slightly, or maybe it was her own hands that were shaking. It's cancer, my love. Lung cancer. Dr. Matthews says it's quite advanced. William's eyes searched her face as if looking for some sign that this was all a terrible mistake, that somehow the doctors had gotten it wrong. But you don't smoke. You've never smoked. How is that possible? Sometimes these things just happen, Catherine said gently. Dr. Matthews explained that environmental factors, genetics, just bad luck can all play a role. The important thing now is that we face this together. William pulled his hands free and stood up abruptly, pacing across the room to the window that overlooked their private garden. In the moonlight, Catherine could see his shoulders rigid with tension, his hands clenched at his sides. How long have you known? He asked without turning around. I suspected something was wrong a few weeks ago. The persistent cough, the fatigue. I had the tests done last week, and Dr. Matthews called yesterday with the results. Yesterday? William's voice was flat, emotionless. You've known since yesterday, and you didn't tell me? Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. I needed time to process it myself first. I needed to figure out how to tell you, how to tell the children. William, please look at me. When he turned around, Catherine saw that his eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw clenched tight. What did the doctor say about treatment? Surgery? Chemotherapy? There must be something they can do. She had been dreading this part of the conversation. There are options. Treatments that might help manage the symptoms, possibly extend the time we have. But, William, she paused, forcing herself to say the words that felt like poison on her tongue. It's not curable. Dr. Matthews thinks we might have 6 months to a year, possibly more with treatment, but the sentence hung unfinished as William sank back down onto the sofa, his head in his hands. Catherine watched as the man who had always been her anchor, her steady presence through every storm, began to crumble before her eyes. "This isn't happening," he whispered. "This can't be happening. We have children. We have responsibilities. We have our whole lives ahead of us." Catherine moved closer to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "I know, my darling. I know it's not fair. But this is what we're facing, and I need you to help me figure out how to handle it." They sat together in silence for what felt like hours, holding each other as the reality of their situation began to sink in. Finally, William lifted his head and looked at her with eyes full of pain, but also determination. "What do the doctors recommend? What's the best course of action?" Catherine felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was the William she knew and loved, the man who faced every challenge head-on, who looked for solutions even in the darkest circumstances. "There's a treatment plan Dr. Matthews wants to try. It's aggressive, and the side effects will be difficult, but it might give us more time. The question is whether we want to spend that time fighting the cancer or living." William frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we could spend the next year in and out of hospitals, dealing with chemotherapy and radiation, feeling sick and weak, fighting a battle we're unlikely to win. Or we could choose to forego the more aggressive treatments and focus on making the most of whatever time we have left together." The weight of this decision settled between them like a stone. Catherine had been thinking about it since yesterday, weighing the pros and cons, trying to imagine what would be best for everyone involved. "I keep thinking about the children," she continued. "Do I want them to remember me sick and weak, spending our last months together in hospital rooms? Or do I want to use this time to create beautiful memories, to travel to places we've always dreamed of visiting, to have conversations and experiences that will sustain them after I'm gone?" William was quiet for a long time, processing everything she had said. Finally, he spoke. "What do you want to do?" Catherine smiled through her tears. "I want to live, William. Really live. I want to take the children to Scotland and show them where you proposed. I want to go back to St. Andrews and walk through the places where we fell in love. I want to have picnics in the garden and teach Charlotte how to bake scones and watch George play football and read bedtime stories to Lewis. And I want to tell them myself," she continued. "I want to explain to them what's happening in a way they can understand, and I want to help them process their feelings about it. They deserve to know the truth, and they deserve time to say goodbye." William nodded slowly. "When do you want to tell them?" "Soon. Maybe this weekend, when we go to the cottage. Somewhere private, somewhere they feel safe and comfortable." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Their housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, peered in apologetically. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Your Royal Highnesses, but Prince George is having trouble sleeping. He's asking for his mother." Catherine exchanged a look with William, then rose from the sofa. "I'll go to him." George's bedroom was dimly lit by a small nightlight shaped like a star. He was sitting up in bed, his dark hair messy from tossing and turning, his eyes wide and worried. "Mummy, I heard voices. Are you and Papa arguing?" Catherine sat down on the edge of his bed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "No, sweetheart, we weren't arguing. We were just having an important conversation about some grown-up things." "What kind of grown-up things?" Catherine's heart ached as she looked at her eldest son, so innocent and trusting. Soon, his world would be turned upside down, and there was nothing she could do to protect him from that pain. "Just family things, my love. Nothing for you to worry about tonight. Would you like me to read you a story?" George nodded eagerly, scooting over to make room for her on the bed. Catherine pulled out one of his favorite books, a tale about a brave knight and a magical kingdom. As she read, she found herself memorizing every detail. The way George's eyes grew heavy as the story progressed, the sound of his soft breathing, the warmth of his small body nestled against hers. When he finally fell asleep, Catherine kissed his forehead gently and whispered, "I love you more than all the stars in the sky, my precious boy. Always remember that." Back in their own room, she found William still awake, staring out at the darkened gardens. He had changed into his pajamas, but she could tell by the tension in his posture that sleep would be elusive for both of them tonight. "How is he?" William asked as she joined him by the window. "He's fine, just a bit restless. I think children sometimes sense when something is wrong, even when we try to hide it." William put his arm around her, pulling her close. Catherine, I need you to know something. Whatever you decide about treatment, whatever path you choose, I'll support you completely. This is your decision to make. Catherine leaned into his warmth, grateful for his understanding. I've been thinking about something else, too. I want to write letters. For the children, for special occasions in their lives that I might miss. Birthdays, graduations, weddings. I want them to have something from me for those important moments. That's a beautiful idea, William said softly. I'll help you with whatever you need. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the gardens where their children played every day, where they had hosted countless events for charity, where they had built so many memories as a family. I'm scared, William, Catherine admitted quietly. Not of dying, exactly, but of leaving all of you behind. Of missing out on watching the children grow up, of not being there when they need me. William turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You will always be with them, Catherine. In every lesson you've taught them, every hug you've given them, every story you've read to them. Love doesn't end just because someone isn't physically present. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. But, for the first time since receiving the diagnosis, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude for having found such deep love, for having had the chance to build a beautiful life with this remarkable man, for having brought 3 wonderful children into the world. I love you, she whispered against his chest. I love you too, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. We're going to make this time count, Catherine. We're going to create so much love and joy that it will sustain our children for the rest of their lives. As they held each other in the quiet of their bedroom, Catherine felt a sense of peace beginning to replace the fear that had consumed her since the diagnosis. She had made her choice. She would fight this disease, but not with chemicals and radiation. She would fight it with love, with memory-making, with the fierce determination to live fully in whatever time remained. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult conversations, and heart-wrenching decisions. But tonight, she was still here, still alive, still surrounded by the love that had defined her adult life. And for now, that was enough. The cottage in the Cotswolds had always been their sanctuary, a place where they could escape the formality of royal life and simply be a family. The honey-colored stone walls and thatched roof seemed to embrace them as they arrived on Friday afternoon, the children tumbling out of the car with their usual enthusiasm. Can we go to the apple orchard first? Charlotte asked, her art supplies clutched in one hand and a small stuffed rabbit in the other. After we get settled, Catherine replied, forcing brightness into her voice. Why don't you and your brothers choose your rooms while Papa and I bring in the luggage? As the children raced inside, Catherine stood for a moment in the doorway, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and old wood. How many times had they come here over the years? How many lazy Sunday mornings had they spent in the garden? How many evening walks through the nearby fields? William appeared beside her with their weekend bags, his face reflecting the same mixture of love and sadness she felt. They had decided to tell the children on Sunday morning, giving themselves this last weekend of innocence together as a family. Second thoughts? He asked quietly. Catherine shook her head. No, they deserve to know. And we all deserve the chance to talk about it openly, to process it together. Saturday passed in a blur of normal family activities that felt anything but normal. They picked apples in the orchard, with Louis insisting on climbing higher than his little legs could safely manage. They had a picnic lunch in the garden, complete with cucumber sandwiches and Charlotte's favorite lemonade. George taught his younger siblings how to skip stones in the nearby stream, while Catherine and William watched from a blanket spread beneath an old oak tree. Mummy, look, Louis called out, running toward them with his arms full of wildflowers. I picked these for you because they're pretty like you. Catherine felt her throat tighten as she accepted the slightly wilted bouquet. They're absolutely beautiful, my darling. Thank you. That evening, after dinner and baths and bedtime stories, Catherine found herself standing outside George's room, listening to him read quietly to himself. At 8 years old, he was becoming quite independent, but he still liked her to check on him before she went to bed. She knocked softly and entered to find him propped up against his pillows with a book about dinosaurs. Still awake, my love? I'm reading about velociraptors, George said solemnly. Did you know they were actually quite small? Much smaller than in the movies. Catherine sat on the edge of his bed, marveling at his serious expression. George had always been thoughtful, old beyond his years in many ways. How would he handle the news she was about to deliver? George, she said carefully, how would you feel if Mummy was sick? Not like a cold or a headache, but really sick. George looked up from his book, his brow furrowed with concern. Are you sick, Mummy? Catherine felt her heart race. This wasn't how she had planned to start the conversation, but something about the quiet intimacy of the moment made it feel right. Yes, sweetheart. I am. That's why Papa and I wanted to bring you and Charlotte and Louis here this weekend. We need to have an important family talk tomorrow. George set his book aside and studied her face with the intensity that reminded her so much of William. Is that why you've been coughing so much? And why you look tired sometimes? Yes, that's why. You're very observant. Will you get better? This was the question Catherine had been dreading most. How do you explain terminal illness to a child without completely destroying their sense of security and hope? The doctors are going to try their best to help me feel better, but this kind of sickness is very serious. What's most important is that we spend time together as a family and talk about how we're all feeling. George was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the same careful consideration he applied to everything. Finally, he reached over and took her hand. I love you, Mummy. I love you too, my precious boy, more than you could ever imagine. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with golden autumn lights streaming through the cottage windows. Catherine made pancakes, George's favorite, while William helped the younger children get dressed. The ordinary domesticity of the morning felt precious and fragile. After breakfast, they gathered in the cottage's cozy sitting room. Charlotte had brought her crayons and was drawing at the coffee table, while Louis played quietly with his toy cars. George sat cross-legged on the rug, still in his pajamas despite the late morning hour. Children, William began, his voice steady but gentle. Mummy, and I need to talk to you about something very important. Charlotte looked up from her drawing, her blue eyes wide with sudden concern. Are we in trouble? No, sweetheart, Catherine said quickly. You're not in trouble at all. But we do need to share some news with you. And we want you to know that it's okay to ask questions and to feel however you feel about what we tell you. She took a deep breath, looking at each of her children's faces and trying to memorize this moment before everything changed. I'm sick, she said simply. I have something called cancer, which is when some cells in your body start growing in ways they shouldn't. The doctors are going to try to help me feel better, but this is a very serious kind of sickness. Louis, who was only 4 and didn't fully understand what cancer meant, continued playing with his cars. But Charlotte had gone very still, her crayon frozen in her hand. Will you die? Charlotte asked, her voice small and scared. Catherine's heart broke at the direct innocence of the question. I might, my darling. The doctors aren't sure exactly what will happen, but I might not get better from this sickness. Suddenly, Charlotte's crayon clattered to the floor, and she launched herself into Catherine's arms, sobbing with the fierce intensity that only children could muster. I don't want you to die, Mummy. I don't want you to leave us. Catherine held her daughter tightly, feeling her own tears flow freely. I know, sweetheart. I don't want to leave you either. That's why we're going to make sure we spend lots of special time together. George had gone very quiet, his face pale but composed. How long do we have? He asked, his 8-year-old vocabulary struggling with concepts far beyond his years. We don't know exactly, William answered honestly. Maybe a few months, maybe longer. But whatever time we have, we're going to use it to do things we love and to talk about our feelings. Louis finally looked up from his toys, sensing the emotional weight in the room even if he didn't understand the words. Why is Charlotte crying? He asked. Catherine wiped her eyes and reached for her youngest son, pulling him onto her lap alongside Charlotte. Charlotte is sad because Mummy is sick, and sometimes when we're sad, we cry. That's okay. It's good to cry when we feel sad. Are you sad, Mummy? Yes, little love. I am sad. But I'm also happy because I get to be here with all of you right now, and because we love each other so much. The next hour was filled with questions, tears, and hugs. George wanted to know about hospitals and treatments and whether it hurt. Charlotte worried about who would braid her hair and help her with her homework. Louis asked if he could bring Mummy soup when she didn't feel well, the way she brought him soup when he was sick. I want to do something special, George announced suddenly. I want to make a memory book with pictures and stories about all the fun things we do together. That's a wonderful idea, Catherine said, her heart swelling with pride at her son's thoughtfulness. We could all work on it together. And I want to learn how to make your favorite cookies, Charlotte added, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. So I can make them for you when you're feeling sick. And I want to give you lots of hugs, Louis chimed in, squeezing Catherine's arm. Hugs make everything better. By afternoon, The initial shock had begun to wear off, replaced by a new kind of closeness between them. They took a long walk through the countryside, with the children pointing out interesting leaves and flowers to add to Charlotte's nature collection. They told stories and sang songs and had the kind of unhurried conversation that had always been precious but now felt sacred. That evening, as Catherine tucked each child into bed, she found herself storing up every detail. The way George's hair stuck up at odd angles after his bath. The careful way Charlotte arranged her stuffed animals before going to sleep. The sweet, sleepy weight of Louis in her arms as she carried him to his room. "Mummy," Charlotte whispered as Catherine kissed her goodnight. "Will you still be able to see us from heaven?" Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I believe I will, my darling. And even if I can't see you with my eyes, you'll always carry me in your heart. Every time you remember something we did together, every time you hear a song we sang, every time you feel brave and kind and loving, I'll be right there with you. Promise. I promise." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Catherine and William sat together on the cottage's small porch, wrapped in a blanket and watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "They handled it better than I expected," William said quietly. "Children are remarkably resilient," Catherine replied. "They feel things deeply, but they also adapt. I think the hardest part for them will be the uncertainty, not knowing exactly when or how things will change. What can we do to help them with that?" Catherine considered this for a moment. "We can give them as much normalcy as possible while still being honest about what's happening. We can answer their questions truthfully, but age-appropriately. And we can make sure they know that loving them, and being proud of them, and wanting the best for them will never change, no matter what happens to me." William tightened his arm around her. "I keep thinking about all the things you'll miss. George's graduation, Charlotte's first school play, Louis learning to ride a bike, their weddings, grandchildren." "I know," Catherine said softly. "But I also think about all the things I won't miss. The foundation I've laid with them, the values I've taught them, the love I've given them. Those things don't disappear when I do. They become part of who they are." As they sat together under the vast canopy of stars, Catherine felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. The hardest conversation was behind them now. Her children knew the truth, and while it had been painful to see their fear and sadness, she had also seen their strength, their love, and their willingness to face this challenge together as a family. Tomorrow they would return to London and begin the process of adjusting their lives to this new reality. There would be medical appointments and difficult decisions and probably many more tears. But tonight, they were all together under one roof, safe and warm and surrounded by love. And for Catherine, that felt like the most precious gift of all. The weeks that followed their weekend at the cottage were unlike any the family had ever experienced. There was a strange intensity to their daily life, as if someone had adjusted the contrast and made everything more vivid, more meaningful. Simple moments that might have passed unnoticed before now felt precious and worth savoring. Catherine had started a gentle treatment plan designed to manage her symptoms rather than cure the disease. The medications helped with the pain and fatigue, though they came with their own set of challenges. Some days she felt almost normal, others she struggled to get out of bed. But she was determined to make the most of her good days. The children had adapted to the new reality with the remarkable flexibility of youth, though each in their own way. George had thrown himself into research, reading everything he could find about cancer and treatment options. He approached his mother's illness with the same methodical thoroughness he applied to his schoolwork, asking detailed questions and taking notes as if knowledge alone could somehow change the outcome. "Mummy," he said one morning over breakfast, consulting a notebook filled with his careful handwriting, "I read that people with cancer need lots of protein and vitamins. I've made a list of foods that might help you feel stronger." Catherine smiled at his earnest expression, even as her heart ached at the burden he had placed on his young shoulders. "That's very thoughtful of you, sweetheart. What's on your list?" George read off his recommendations with the seriousness of a doctor delivering a prescription: salmon for omega-3 fatty acids, spinach for iron, blueberries for antioxidants. Catherine listened carefully, asking questions about his research and praising his thoroughness, while privately worrying about her 8-year-old son trying to solve adult problems. Charlotte had channeled her emotions into art and creativity. Her drawings had taken on a new depth and poignancy, filled with rainbows and flowers and families holding hands. She had started making Catherine small gifts almost daily, handmade cards with carefully written messages of love, friendship bracelets woven from bright threads, pressed flowers arranged in intricate patterns. "This one is for when you feel sad," Charlotte explained, presenting Catherine with a drawing of a garden filled with butterflies. "Because butterflies are happy, and they make everyone smile." Louis, at 4, understood the least about what was happening but seemed to sense the heightened emotions around him. He had become more clingy than usual, often insisting on sitting in Catherine's lap during story time and following her around the house like a little shadow. His innocent questions sometimes cut the deepest. "Mummy, when you go to heaven, will you send me letters?" he asked one afternoon as they worked together in the palace garden. "I can't send letters from heaven, my darling," Catherine replied gently, helping him plant seeds in a small patch of earth they had designated as his special garden. "But I can write you letters now that you can read whenever you miss me. Would you like that?" Louis nodded solemnly, then brightened. "And when these flowers grow, I can think of you every time I look at them." Catherine had indeed begun writing letters, dozens of them. Letters for birthdays, letters for first days of school, letters for graduations and weddings and moments of triumph and heartbreak that she would never witness. She wrote in the early morning hours when the house was quiet, and her mind was clear, pouring her love and wisdom and hopes for her children onto page after page. The letter writing had become a kind of meditation, a way to process her own grief while creating something lasting for her children. She wrote about the values she hoped they would embrace, the dreams she had for their futures, and the deep, abiding love that would connect them always. "My dearest George," one letter began, "on your 16th birthday, you will be becoming a young man, and I wish I could be there to see the remarkable person you're growing into. I imagine you're still asking thoughtful questions and approaching life with the same careful consideration that has always amazed me. Remember that it's okay not to have all the answers, my love. Sometimes the questions themselves are more important than the solutions we think we need." William had initially struggled with watching Catherine pour so much energy into preparing for her absence. "You're planning your own memorial," he said one evening, finding her surrounded by cards and letters at her writing desk. "I'm planning their future," she corrected gently. "I'm trying to find a way to still be present in their lives, even when I can't physically be there." Gradually, William came to understand the gift Catherine was creating, and he began helping her with the project. Together, they recorded videos for special occasions, created photo albums with written memories of their life as a family, and even collaborated on a cookbook filled with Catherine's favorite recipes and the stories behind them. The public aspect of Catherine's illness had been carefully managed. They had released a simple statement explaining that she was facing a health challenge and would be reducing her public engagements. The response from the public had been overwhelming, with thousands of letters, flowers, and gifts arriving at the palace daily. "Look at this one," Catherine said to William one afternoon, holding up a drawing from a 7-year-old girl in Manchester. "She drew our whole family with wings, so we can all be angels together." The children's perspectives on death and heaven had led to some surprisingly profound conversations. One evening at dinner, Charlotte announced that she had been thinking about what happens after people die. "I think heaven is like the biggest, most beautiful garden ever," she said thoughtfully. "With every kind of flower and tree, and all the people you love are there to have picnics with you." "That sounds lovely," Catherine said. "What do you think, George? What does heaven look like to you?" George considered this seriously, as he did everything. "I think it's different for everyone. For you, it might be full of books and gardens and music. For Louis, maybe it has every toy he's ever wanted and unlimited ice cream. And for you," William prompted, "probably a huge library with answers to every question I've ever had," George said matter-of-factly, making both his parents smile. These conversations about life and death and what came after had become a regular part of their family discussions. Catherine was amazed by her children's capacity for deep thought, their ability to grapple with concepts that many adults struggled to understand. As Catherine's condition gradually worsened, they had begun traveling to places that held special meaning for their family. A trip to Scotland, where William had proposed during their university years. A weekend in Norfolk, where they had spent their early married years. A visit to the small village where Catherine had grown up, introducing the children to the places that had shaped their mother's childhood. Each trip was planned around Catherine's energy levels and good days, with flexible itineraries that could be adjusted based on how she was feeling. The children had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when Mummy needed rest, becoming remarkably attuned to her needs without being prompted. "We don't have to go to the beach today if you're tired," Charlotte would say on mornings when Catherine moved slowly. "We could just stay here and color, or you could rest while we play quietly." The most difficult aspect of Catherine's illness wasn't the physical symptoms, though those were certainly challenging. It was the emotional weight of watching her family begin to grieve while she was still alive. She could see William struggling to balance his role as a supportive husband with his own need to process what was happening. She watched her children oscillate between normal childhood concerns and the heavy awareness of their mother's mortality. One particularly challenging day came when Louis, in a moment of 4-year-old frustration over a broken toy, cried out, "I want my mummy," even though Catherine was sitting right beside him. "I'm right here, sweetheart," Catherine said, reaching for him. "Not sick mummy," Louis sobbed. "Happy mummy who runs and plays and doesn't need to rest all the time." The words cut deep because they were so honest. Catherine was still their mother, still present and loving and involved in their daily lives. But the illness had changed her, had made her frilier and less energetic, and Louis was mourning the mother he was losing even as he clung to the mother he still had. "It's okay to miss the way things used to be," Catherine told him, pulling him into her arms. "I miss it too. But I'm still your mummy, and I still love you more than all the stars in the sky." These moments of raw honesty, painful as they were, had brought the family closer together in unexpected ways. They had learned to talk about difficult feelings, to comfort each other during sad moments, and to celebrate small joys with greater intensity. The memory book that George had suggested was growing into a family project, with each member contributing stories, pictures, and mementos from their life together. Charlotte drew illustrations for the stories Catherine and William wrote about their courtship and early marriage. George researched historical facts about places they had visited. Louis contributed his own artwork and dictated stories about his favorite family activities. "When we look at this book in the future," Catherine explained to the children, "it will help us remember not just the facts about our life together, but how it felt to be a family. The laughter, the love, the way we took care of each other." As winter approached, Catherine found herself measuring time differently, not in months or years, but in seasons and celebrations. She wanted to see one more Christmas with her family, one more New Year, one more spring garden blooming in their private courtyard. The approaching holiday season felt both precious and bittersweet. They had decided to scale back their usual royal obligations and focus on private family celebrations. Catherine had begun preparing special gifts for each family member, items that would carry meaning long after she was gone. "I want this Christmas to be perfect," she told William one evening as they sat together planning the holiday celebrations. "It will be perfect because we'll be together," he replied, taking her hand in his. "That's all that matters." But even as Catherine focused on creating beautiful memories and meaningful moments with her family, she couldn't ignore the reality that time was growing shorter. The treatments were helping with pain management, but the underlying disease continued to progress. Some days were harder than others, and she found herself needing more rest, more assistance with daily tasks. Still, she was determined to live fully in whatever time remained, to pack as much love and joy and connection as possible into each day she had left with the people who meant everything to her. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a burst of daffodils and cherry blossoms that seemed to mock the approaching darkness in Catherine's life. She had made it through Christmas, had seen the wonder in her children's eyes as they opened presents under the tree, had shared quiet moments with William as they watched their family celebrate together. But by March, even the gentlest treatments had become too much for her weakened body to handle. Dr. Matthews had been honest with both Catherine and William about what the coming weeks would likely bring. The time for active treatment was ending. Now it was about comfort, dignity, and making the most of whatever time remained. Catherine had chosen to spend her final weeks at their private residence rather than in a hospital. The rooms had been quietly transformed to accommodate her needs, with a hospital bed positioned by the large windows that overlooked her beloved gardens. She could see the children playing outside, could watch the seasons change, could feel connected to the life continuing around her. The hardest part wasn't the physical decline, though that brought its own challenges. The hardest part was watching her family struggle with the approaching reality of loss while trying to maintain some semblance of normal life for the children. William had become her constant companion, barely leaving her side except when duty absolutely demanded it. He had arranged for most of his official engagements to be postponed or handled by other family members, understanding that these days and Weeks were more precious than any royal obligation. You should go to the environmental summit, Catherine urged him one afternoon, noting his reluctance to leave even for important work commitments. The children are at school, and I'll be resting anyway. This cause matters to you. Nothing matters more than being here with you, William replied firmly, settling into the chair beside her bed with a book they had been reading together. The children had been prepared as gently as possible for what was coming, with age-appropriate conversations about how Mummy's body was getting too tired to fight the sickness anymore. They had been encouraged to spend time with her, to ask questions, and to express their feelings however they needed to. George, now 9 and startlingly mature for his age, had taken on an almost protective role with his younger siblings. Catherine often found him explaining things to Charlotte and Louis in his careful, thoughtful way, helping them understand concepts that even adults struggled with. When someone dies, she overheard him telling Louis one afternoon, "Their body stops working, but the love they gave you stays in your heart forever. Like how Mummy's hugs will always feel warm in your memory, even when she can't hug you anymore." Charlotte had developed a ritual of bringing Catherine fresh flowers from the garden every morning, carefully arranging them in a small vase beside her bed. "Flowers make everything more beautiful," she explained seriously, "and I want everything to be beautiful for you, Mummy." The flowers had become a daily source of joy for Catherine, a tangible connection to the natural world she loved so much. Each arrangement was different, reflecting Charlotte's growing understanding of color and design, her 6-year-old aesthetic sense blossoming alongside the spring garden. Louis, still just 4, struggled the most with the abstract concept of death. He would sometimes climb carefully into bed beside Catherine and ask when she would be all better, when she would be able to play football with him again, when they could go back to the park together. "My body is too tired for those things now, my sweet boy," Catherine would explain patiently. "But you can tell me about your games, and I can watch you play from the window, and we can still have our special talks together." One particularly difficult afternoon, as Catherine drifted in and out of sleep due to the pain medication, she was awakened by hushed voices in her room. Opening her eyes, she found all 3 children sitting quietly around her bed, George reading aloud from a book of poetry, while Charlotte and Louis listened with the intense concentration they usually reserved for their favorite television programs. "What are you reading, my love?" Catherine asked softly. George looked up, his face lighting up at hearing her voice. "We're reading you poems about gardens and flowers and beautiful things. Charlotte thought it might give you happy dreams." Catherine felt tears welling up in her eyes, overwhelmed by the tender thoughtfulness of her children. "That's the most beautiful gift you could give me. Would you read me one more?" As George's clear young voice filled the room with words about sunshine and growth and the endless cycle of seasons, Catherine found herself filled with a deep sense of peace. Her children were learning to give comfort as well as receive it, to think beyond their own needs, and consider how they could bring joy to others. Whatever else happened, she knew they would grow into compassionate, caring adults. The final week arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if the universe wanted to give Catherine one last taste of the sunshine she loved so much. She spent her days propped up by the window, watching the garden bloom with spring flowers, listening to the sounds of her family continuing their daily routines around her. William had arranged for extended family members to visit, giving Catherine the chance to say goodbye to the people who had shaped her adult life. Her own parents came, spending quiet hours by her bedside sharing memories of her childhood, telling stories about the determined little girl who had grown up to capture a prince's heart. The king visited regularly, often bringing updates about royal business, but mostly just sitting quietly beside his daughter-in-law's bed, holding her hand in comfortable silence. Their relationship had deepened over the years from dutiful formality to genuine affection, and Catherine treasured these peaceful moments with the man who had welcomed her into his family. But it was the everyday moments with her immediate family that meant the most. William reading her favorite passages from books they had shared, the children showing her their schoolwork, their artwork, their small daily accomplishments. Family meals eaten around her bed when she felt strong enough to join them. Lullabies sung softly in the evening as the sun set over their private gardens. On what would be her last fully conscious day, Catherine asked William to gather the children for one final conversation. They arranged themselves around her bed, George and Charlotte sitting cross-legged on the floor, while Louis curled up carefully beside her. "I want to tell you something very important," Catherine began, her voice weak but clear. "I am so proud to be your mummy." Watching you grow and learn and become your own wonderful selves has been the greatest joy of my life." She looked at each child individually, storing up the image of their faces, their beautiful, innocent expressions full of love and sadness and hope. "George, my thoughtful boy, I want you to keep asking questions and looking for answers, but remember that it's okay not to know everything. Your curiosity and kindness will take you far in life. Charlotte, my artistic princess, keep making beautiful things that bring joy to the world. Your creativity is a gift, and sharing it with others will make their lives brighter. Louis, my sweet baby, never stop hugging the people you love. Your gentle heart and sunny smile can heal sadness wherever you go." Catherine took a shaky breath, overwhelmed by the enormity of trying to fit a lifetime of motherly wisdom into one conversation. "I need you to promise me something," she continued. "Promise me that you'll take care of each other, that you'll be kind to Papa, and that you'll remember that love never ends. Even when you can't see me, I'll be loving you." "We promise, Mummy," George said solemnly, speaking for all three children. "And I promise to love you forever and always," Catherine whispered, using the phrase that had ended their bedtime routine since they were babies. That evening, after the children had been tucked into bed with extra stories and longer than usual good-night hugs, Catherine and William sat together by the window watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Do you remember our wedding night?" Catherine asked softly, her hand resting in William's. "How we sat on the balcony and talked about all the adventures we would have together?" William squeezed her hand gently. "I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive to have found you. We did have adventures, didn't we? Beautiful, wonderful adventures." "The best," William agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "And the children, Catherine, they're extraordinary. They're so much like you, kind and thoughtful and resilient. They're like you too, strong and principled and capable of great love. They'll be okay, William. We've given them everything they need to build good lives." Catherine drifted off to sleep that night feeling surrounded by love, wrapped in the warmth of memories and the knowledge that she had lived fully, loved completely, and left the world a little better than she had found it. She passed peacefully in the early hours of the morning, with William holding her hand and spring sunlight beginning to filter through the windows of the room where she had said goodbye to the life she had cherished so deeply. The days that followed were filled with the formal rituals of royal mourning, but also with the private grief of a family learning to navigate life without the woman who had been its heart. The children, sustained by the letters Catherine had written and the memories they had created together, began the long process of growing up without their mother while carrying her love within them always. And, in gardens across the kingdom, people planted flowers in Catherine's memory, creating living monuments to a woman who had understood that love, like the perennial plants she adored, could bloom again and again, season after season, long after its original source had returned to the earth.